Antarctica is one of the loneliest places on Earth. Its harsh, cold weather feels so empty, and few films visualize this emptiness as clearly as John Carpenter's The Thing. Antarctica isn't simply used as a setting here, it's a void. There's no safety to return to, no help coming, and little knowledge of what even exists in the outside world. Carpenter traps his characters in a place that feels truly isolated, making them disappear from the world around them. Being trapped in that space for so long, everything starts to break down. Trust, identity, and even the idea of your fellow man is tested as the film's monster strips every single man of their confidence. These men are forced to live in a state of permanent uncertainty where they can't even be sure who they are themselves anymore. In my life, however, this film has never really existed on its own. It's always been tied to something else outside of it. What happens on screen stays the same, but the experience of watching it is unique every time. One of the earliest memories I have of seeing a movie in theaters was seeing this with my dad at the Carolina Theater in Durham. Was I old enough to see this? No, of course not. But my dad is buddies with the head of the theater, Jim, who agreed to let me in as long as I didn't scream too loud. I promised, we marched in, and I was absolutely terrified for an hour and a half. After it was over, my dad and I went to Waffle House and talked about the movie for hours on end. Looking back at it, what I remember most about that night wasn't even seeing the film for the first time, but how I got to experience that with my dad. Since then, we've watched this film together at least a dozen times, and it's really interesting how the film never gets old, even on the 10th rewatch. We watch the same scenes, the same characters, the same intense moments, but each viewing feels a little different. Where we watch the film changes, who we watch it with changes. The distance between the men of Outpost 31 never stops growing, while I keep growing closer and closer to those around me. Just last year, I had the amazing opportunity to take some of my friends who had never seen the film back to Carolina Theater and see it in the same room I had sat in over 10 years earlier. We walked in, I shook Jim's hand, and watched as they quite literally jumped out of their seats when Norris's chest burst open. The film was exactly the same as I remembered it, but this time really felt different. The film took on a whole new meaning. I was now the one sharing one of my favorite films, a piece of me, with those important to me. It's easy to think of films as fixed pieces of media, purely self-contained, but experiencing art is never the same. The Thing continues to collect associations in my mind, being present in nearly every phase of my life. A film so built on isolation has brought me closer with those around me, even when I felt closed off from myself. Every moment of this film invites a strong feeling of loneliness. The violent actions create more distance and fear between the men. There's never any relaxation or lighthearted banter. The threat isn't simply that someone around you may be infected, it's that you can't prove that they aren't. That uncertainty spreads faster than anything else, and even when the credits roll, it's never truly relieved. The world shrinks smaller and smaller as this sense of dread grows, knowing that there's no one around to help pull these men out of that darkness. Even the extreme moments, ones that should shock you, don't really feel like interruptions. They just feel inevitable. Once you can't rely on anyone around you, every relationship becomes very fragile. We're placed in a world where survival means distance. The more you sit with it, the harder it is to ignore the gap between what the film does and how it's experienced. On screen, everything narrows, relationships collapse, and the concept of simply understanding someone else disappears. It insists that these relationships are liabilities rather than something to take comfort in. But that isn't the only thing happening. Outside of that outpost, outside of the paranoia, outside of the isolation woven through the entire film, is a father taking his youngest son to the movies. A college kid sharing his favorite films with his friends. A son going back to his father years later to recount the story of seeing the film for the first time and laughing about it together. It's not in the film itself, but how it lives on beyond the screen. It's become something shared and returned to throughout my entire life. Despite the film instilling a feeling of isolation and discomfort on screen, it's become a symbol of quite the opposite. Not separation, but connection.
That should be great.
All
Thank
right.
you so
Yep.
much. I
Sure.
appreciate
Yep.
it.
No problem.
Say it again.
Goodbye.